Alright, it's time to inject the city with a little bit of uniqueness. Before I can set out where I want the CBD to be, I need to get all the terraforming done. And I've had a little bit of a change of heart with this area, so you're going to see me delete a little bit, but I would like you guys to see where I'm taking inspiration from. So on Google Earth, you can see here that there's this little wee bay in Auckland, and it's got this awesome rail line that goes right through the middle of the bay. The train station's also sticking out on a little wee peninsula, which is pretty unique, and there's all sorts of cool little things down here as well, like there's a marina and a mini park. This is also very close to the middle of downtown Auckland, so this is perfect for inspiration here. Let's try and introduce something like this into Waihi. All of those cool little bays around Auckland are just really interesting, I think. It's funny because I've looked at Auckland a million times on Google Earth, but it's funny how sometimes you don't notice something until you sort of consciously make yourself aware of it. By the time I'd finished looking at this bay, I realised there was like 40 others right around the city, and they all look pretty similar, but just the way they sort of weave their way inland and then turn into a little wee stream with a few trees around it. That is exactly what I would like to achieve here, and I'm hoping it adds a nice little realistic touch to the city. I am umming and ahhing about whether I should change the texture of the sand. The black sand at the moment looks really good and it's pretty close to what we would see in New Zealand, but we also see a lot of golden sand beaches in Auckland, which sort of throws a spanner in the works really. I'm sticking with the black sand for now, but we'll see what happens. So I've pretty much got this whole bay done here, at least to a standard where we can start sort of building around it. We're also going to build in the local neighbourhood around this train station whilst we build the train station and that cool line going through the middle of the bay. The neighbourhood on this peninsula is going to follow the real life one, and it's pretty much 95% residential or low residential. It's a pretty old neighbourhood at its core. I can see some houses from 1910 and 1920s, but there's also been a couple of lots that have been upgraded to some really nice places. It kind of depends on the location. Does it have a nice view? Does it have a good access to amenities and services? Blah 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 blah. But it didn't feel right just to plop the train station in the middle of nowhere, because we are quite a way away from what we've built so far, and then just leave it at that. So I'm going to do somewhat of the surrounding area. So to put the line through the bay, I'm just going to stick with the vanilla train tracks and a vanilla road for now, just to map it out and make sure it's sort of going in the right direction. And then the idea is to come back and upgrade this later on to something a little bit more realistic, maybe something from Revo. We're going to do that same thing with the main road that goes over the very end of the bay behind the train station. Maybe we'll upgrade this to something really nice in future. Or maybe something really horrible covered in graffiti. I don't know. I'm probably leaning towards the latter actually. But once we're done with all of that, we're going to detail up the train station. Pretty no frills, but I think it's alright. The detail isn't massive, but I'm also trying to keep in mind that, the city's going to get pretty large. My thinking is I can sort of always add detail in later on. And at this point, needless detail just is needless. So a car park there, a bit of bush here, maybe a park truck there, and she's job done. I've got some really nice models of homes that are appropriate for this area here, off the Steam Workshop. I've got some really nice 100-year-old Victorians, thanks to Seabud, I think it is. My apologies if it's not. I've got some nice boomer homes, which are pretty much just your standard generic Kiwi style home. And we've got some really nice upgraded homes as well that look like they've been built recently. 99% of these come pre-detailed, which is awesome, saves a lot of time, and I think this little neighbourhood looks great. I've left one of the more prominent blocks blank here because I got a bit of an idea. I'd like to turn this into like a local sports ground or a local domain. Maybe there's a local football team or a rugby league team that has their club grounds here. So this is going to include like the clubhouse, obviously, a small car park, and I don't know, maybe there's facilities for people to walk their dog and just go for a walk in general around the domain when there's not sport on. And all of that sounded really great, so I started building that, and it wasn't until I was about halfway through that I realised that there's about a 10-metre vertical fall from one end of the field to the other. Yeah, that's not ideal for football. So in the end, the whole thing gets repurposed as just a general domain. I did contemplate like creating a new sport like uphill league or whatever, you know, where there's like a clear advantage for one team each half, and maybe there's a new tactic where like you just turn into a boulder and tuck yourself into your legs and just roll. But in the end, that was just far too complicated, so a domain it remains. Let me tell you the story about Bill. Bill bought a house in 2006 against the advice of a building report. That building report said, Bill, you're buying a house right on the side of a cliff that's eroding at a faster rate than we can measure. And Bill said, yeah, but it's got a nice big bar and a spa. And the view was amazing. So Bill pays millions, buys the house, and 10 years later, it's starting to fall apart. At this point, Bill's house has zero resale value, and he's spending thousands just propping it up every year. The moral of the story? Don't be like Bill. New Zealand is in an area called the Roaring Forties, and it's called that because the 40, I think, stands for the latitude that we are at, and roaring is for the wind. We have some of the craziest coastal erosion on the planet, but that does not stop the likes of Bill and similar people spending millions on these properties, because in all honesty the view from these spots is pretty immense, but it's just not worth it in the long run. So you can see there, Bill's house is pretty sweet, man. It's got a couple of pools and all of that, and yeah, they're going to fall into the sea within the next 5 years. But he wasn't the only sucker. His neighbour is even worse off. His house has basically slid halfway down the hill. It's been condemned, it's empty, except for some really desperate homeless people that keep falling to one side of the house, and Bill gets to stare at his near future every single day. So I'm pretty happy with all the terraforming and stuff that we've done so far. I'm just going to do a quick little port area here, and then we're pretty much ready to start setting out the CBD. For some reason I've decided to do the most overly complicated interchange I've ever seen or driven on. This is the literal definition of one more lane, bro. We have basically a 4-lane highway in each direction that splits off into 4 separate single lanes, and sometimes they split off into more single lanes. I mean, this is insanity. And after using the City Skylines 2 road tools, which are really sweet, this is going to be fucking brutal. To make it even more complicated, the whole interchange is sunken into the ground somewhat, so I've got to get all those terrain levels right before we do this too. So let's get rid of all of the old little roads and stuff that I've got in here, get rid of the trees, and bring the highway through from our existing connection. And this will come over a really cool little bridge as well, over the end of the bay we put in earlier. Then I want to bring the highway in and around in a sort of loose U shape that matches what we see in Auckland in real life. At this point, I'm sort of just putting these in really quickly to map out the scale. I know personally that I tend to make things way larger than they are in real life, which is exactly what I end up doing here, no surprise. So I've sort of learnt to map things out before I really get stuck in, otherwise I'll get halfway through and have to change everything. So aside from the highway coming through here, I'm also going to need to put in all of the collector roads and arterial roads. There is so many entry and exit points onto the highway from this area, it's just crazy. And like I mentioned earlier, the CS2 tools for road creation would have had me finish this in probably less than an hour. Instead, this took probably about 8 or 9 hours at a guess, and multiple mods. But I'm certainly not moaning. That's the price I'm willing to pay to do this in City Skylines 1. At this point, this is my preferred game, especially for the way that I play these types of games. I mean, Bill and his stupid house just wouldn't exist in City Skylines 2. And all jokes aside, I was prepared for how brutal it was going to be to do this in City Skylines 1. So we're slowly chipping away at the interchange here, we're getting little bits and pieces done. I'm not bothering with node controller or the intersection marking tool just yet. I have a feeling I'm going to come back and change a lot of these, and I do in the end. Now there's only so much I can say about roads before I run out of things to say, and that moment has arrived. Feel free to skip to about 13 minutes if you want to see the final cinematics, otherwise enjoy some roading. Yeah, so it's basically spaghetti. I get lost just looking at this thing, but I think it's going to look great sitting next to our downtown. I'm sure there's one or two of these interchanges, or one part of it at least, that you guys can probably see I've done wrong, and that's okay. I don't pretend to be amazing with this sort of thing, but I'm pretty proud of what this looks like. We'll see whether I'm that proud after cars have actually tried to use it, but we'll finish it off with some trees, and we're officially ready to start putting down our CBD. The CBD can wait for now, we don't really have too much demand for it. In the meantime, I want to do something else that's pretty interesting. One thing that's happened unfortunately with the introduction of City Skylines 2 is our little community's fallen away a little bit. I mean, we'd all be lying if we said that it hadn't. Interest in the game is really at an all-time low, and the interactions, particularly between like content creators and things like that, is pretty low at the moment too, apart from like 5 Builders 1 City. That's a great series. So what I'm proposing to do with the series is every episode we'll pick another content creator and we'll build something in the city as an ode to them. I definitely don't want it to be too ass-kissy, but I'd like to try and bring together our community, and even if that means bringing some viewers over from maybe their channel, and also for me, it sort of gives me a bit more freedom creatively. I can sort of try and build a small part of the city through another content creator's eyes, or, you know, maybe just add something I wouldn't normally add. And that segues me perfectly into this, a roller coaster. And this might seem like it's come out of nowhere because that's exactly where it's come from. The first content creator that I'm going to put an ode up to is $2.20, and there's a lot of things I could have built as an ode to $2, but his roller coaster from the workshop here, with the help of B. Squigglehouse, Sven Berlin, and Bad Peanut, represents 4 creators, not just one, so I think this is perfect. Plus the roller coaster is really, really cool, and like I said, I would have never added this in if it wasn't for sort of going down this thinking. So we're not just going to chuck the roller coaster in, I'm following what we'd see somewhere in real life, and this time it's from Melbourne. There's a park there called Luna Park, which fits perfectly in this little block, and the roller coaster sort of frames the theme park, which looks really neat. It's right by a really popular beach as well, which gives it this really cool, fun vibe. So I want to find an appropriate spot on our map and then start building this. I've never used this roller coaster before. I've used similar networks, but it was really easy to use and it looks great. It looks just like the one from Melbourne. This is also going to be a proper park within game. We're just using all of the, actually don't know what it's called, like the festival or theme park stuff. There's an entryway here that I've slipped in next to the roller coaster. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a way to get rid of the roller coaster, like the scaffolding that holds the track up, but we're going to do some strategic things here to make it look like the people can walk in the entry here. I've tried to make the entrance look like an old medieval castle, the track's sort of cutting through a couple of ruined parts of it, and I'm going to use procedural objects to make it look like you're going through a big door. Once all that's set up, the inside's pretty simple. I just run out the path that we find in-game and then just put various attractions around in the middle and try and make it look pretty. The park is going to be called the amazingly imaginative $2.20 park, and ironically, it's much dearer than that to get in. I love coming back to Waihi. It's just such a breath of fresh air, and it's nice to build a somewhat conventional city compared to some of my other things I build. You guys, please let me know which content creators you think we should include in the next episode, and maybe give me some ideas on what we could build for them. I really hope you've enjoyed the episode. Give me a thumbs up if you have, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, and I'll see you later.